The archives opened. Most of what they found was unremarkable, the small, grinding violence of a species that had not yet learned to stop fighting itself. Border wars over resources, trade disputes that escalated to brief, bloody exchanges, the ordinary brutality of a primitive civilization making its slow, painful way towards something better. Nothing that warranted concern. Nothing that explained the cold weight settling in the chamber. Then they found the sealed file. It was dated 200 years ago. Classification, extinction event. A predecessor empire, powerful, expansionist, convinced of its own invincibility, had once placed Earth on a list very much like the one the Council now maintained. They had sent a fleet, a large fleet, by the standards of the time, hundreds of ships armed to a degree that should have made the outcome inevitable. The fleet had jumped into Earth's solar system. It had never come back. No wreckage, no distress calls, no survivors, no debris field, no radiation signature, no trace that the fleet had ever existed. Only a single final report from a distant automated probe that had been watching from the outer system, 4 words that would have been almost comically understated if they hadn't been so chilling. Human countermeasure deployed. Enemy presence erased. The file ended there. No elaboration. No explanation of what the countermeasure was, how it worked, where it had come from. The predecessor empire itself had disappeared from the official star maps within a decade of that report, not destroyed in battle, not collapsed from within, simply removed, the way one might erase a line from a document. No trace of their civilization remained. The Council had buried the truth of it 2 centuries ago because the truth had been too terrifying to share. Better to blame a stellar anomaly, a gravitational event, a black hole that consumed the fleet and, coincidentally, an entire empire. The alternative, that a primitive, divided, emotionally volatile species had done it deliberately with a weapon of such absolute finality, was a thought the galaxy had collectively chosen not to think. Now, staring at those 4 words on an ancient screen, they had no more choice. Admiral Zyrex of the Imperial Fleet was a veteran of 30 campaigns. He had overseen the pacification of 3-star systems, had faced down insurrections and invasions with the same measured calm, and prided himself on the fact that nothing had ever made him hesitate. He received a new sensor data from his forward scouts and read it twice before he allowed himself to believe what it was saying. Something had powered on beyond the orbit of the planet the humans called Pluto. Something very large. The energy readings were not explosive, not the wild, unstable output of a weapon charging, which would have been frightening enough. They were controlled, deliberate, the readings of a system that had been waiting, conserving power across decades or centuries, and was now performing a calm, methodical awakening. The structure itself defied his sensor suite's attempts to measure it. The readings kept adjusting upward, as if the instruments were embarrassed by their own inadequacy. "It is a superweapon," one of his officers whispered, her voice tight with something she was trying not to call fear. "No," Admiral Zyrex replied, studying the data with the focused stillness of a man who has just realized the ground beneath him is not solid. "It is a system. Look at the energy distribution. It's not concentrated. It's networked. Whatever that is, it's not a single weapon. It's infrastructure." More shapes appeared in the darkness, spreading outward from the first structure like a constellation being born. Smaller than the first, though smaller was a relative term that lost meaning quickly in context, they arranged themselves in a silent, deliberate line between the Imperial Fleet and Earth. Not aggressive, not threatening, simply present, the way a door presents itself, requiring a choice. The human transmission activated again. This time, it went beyond words. On every Imperial screen, in every command station across the fleet, coordinates began to appear. Zyrex recognized them instantly. They were his own fleet's coordinates, every ship, plotted with precision that no enemy should have been able to achieve. But more than the positions, structural analyses of each vessel, weapon system layouts, shield harmonics, the exact locations of power cores and life support junctions, the millisecond timing windows in each ship's point defense rotation, where a precisely delivered strike would slip through unimpeded. Humanity had already fought this battle. They had studied the Imperial Fleet down to its last vulnerability, and they were showing their work, not as a prelude to attack, but as a message: "We have already won the fight you are considering starting. Look, we want you to see." Zyrex requested permission to delay the invasion. The Council refused. Earth is weak, one leader said. Humans bluff, another insisted. The Admiral looked at the sensor data, at the impossible structure stirring to life in the dark beyond Pluto, at the display of his fleet's every weakness laid out on his own screens by an enemy he had never met. He opened his mouth to comply with the order, and space moved. The great structure beyond Pluto pulsed once. There was no explosion, no blinding beam of annihilating energy, no shockwave, no detonation, just a wave, smooth and invisible, rippling outward through the fabric of space like a note struck on an instrument too vast to see. It crossed the distance between the outer system and the fleet in the time it took Admiral Zyrex to draw one breath. One by one, in perfect sequence, the ships of the Imperial Fleet went silent. Engines died mid-cycle. Weapons locked at whatever angle they'd last been pointed. Navigation systems froze on their last input, leaving every ship suspended in the dark like flies in amber. Engineers threw themselves at manual overrides and found them unresponsive. Emergency systems activated and then simply stopped, as if they'd encountered a concept they didn't have instructions for. Officers shouted commands into internal comms that continued to carry their voices and deliver nothing. The ships were not destroyed. They were not damaged. They were simply, quietly, completely locked, the way you might hold something fragile to prevent it from breaking itself. Every control panel across the entire fleet displayed the same image, a simple symbol, a circle crossed by a single horizontal line. Beneath it, in crisp, translated text, mobility disabled. Defensive action only. Zyrex stood at the center of his command deck in a silence so complete he could hear his own heartbeat. In 30 campaigns, across 3 pacifications and countless smaller engagements, he had never felt this. He did not have a word for it in the moment. Only later would he name it for what it was. He felt, for the first time in his long career, genuinely small. Then something worse happened. The fleet moved, without their engines. Space itself seemed to bend around the frozen ships, gently, deliberately, and shifted them away from Earth's orbit. Not hurled, not repelled in violence. Repositioned, like pieces on a board being cleared by a patient hand that had already calculated the game's end several moves ago and no longer needed to pretend otherwise. And then a voice echoed across all frequencies. Not synthesized, not translated. A human voice, calm and unhurried, stripped of anger and performance, speaking with a particular certainty of someone stating a fact they have known for a very long time. We warned you. 2 words. That was all. On the Council's homeworld, the alien leaders watched in silence as their proud Imperial Fleet drifted helplessly in deep space, stripped of power, stripped of purpose, turned around like children sent home without being allowed to play. The Supreme Counselor, one of the oldest and most decorated figures in galactic governance, a being who had outlived empires, stared at the display and spoke a question that none of his colleagues had yet dared to give words to. How long have they had this? No one answered. Because the answer, the truth that was assembling itself from sealed files and ancient records and a 200-year-old report that ended with 4 words, were becoming visible to all of them at once. Humanity had not built this yesterday. Humanity had not scrambled in response to the fleet's assembly. Humanity had not panicked, had not begged, had not even raised its voice. Humanity had been waiting for someone to make exactly this mistake. The human voice returned, one final time, steady as a star. This is your final chance to leave. In the hour that followed, the Council's historians worked without pause. Every restricted archive was unsealed. Every data vault locked away by previous administrations was opened. Every classified account of every engagement that had ever involved humanity was spread across the Council chambers' displays like evidence of the trial, because that was, in a way, precisely what it was. What emerged was not the story they had told themselves. 2 centuries ago, another empire had grown too powerful and convinced itself that power was permission. They had created the first Extermination List, and Earth had been among the first names written on it. They assembled a fleet far larger than the one now frozen in the outer dark, thousands of ships, carrying the full weight of a civilization that believed itself the apex of what the galaxy could produce. They entered Earth's solar system expecting to end a species. Instead, they ended themselves. Protocol Eternum had activated for the first time. The fleet vanished. Within a decade, the empire that sent them vanished too. Not in fire, not in war, but in the quiet, absolute way of something that has been removed rather than destroyed. The Council of that era had buried the records immediately, reclassified everything, invented the narrative of a stellar catastrophe, and moved on, because the alternative was to acknowledge that humanity, primitive, divided, perpetually warring with itself, century from meaningful interstellar capability, had possessed all along the ability to erase an empire, had chosen not to use it except when cornered, had decided, in some collective and deliberate act that left no trace in any record, to keep the secret, to wait, to be patient. Humans did not fight wars for territory. They did not posture for dominance. When they chose to end the threat, they ended it completely, quietly, without leaving anything for anyone to study or fear or prepare against. And then they went home and continued arguing with each other about borders and resources and the thousand small frustrations of being a young species on a small planet. And the galaxy looked at that arguing and called them primitive. In the council chamber, the Admiral's voice came through on a long-range channel, strained with something that had no precedent in his experience. The structure is maintaining full operational status. I don't believe it will fire. I believe it is waiting to see what we decide. The human transmission updated. New words appeared beneath the original 12. Crisp and unhurried, you marked us for extinction. That action has consequences. We do not seek conquest. We seek balance. On Earth, no alarms were sounding. Cities continued their normal routines. People walked in morning light. Children filled schools with noise. The ordinary chaos of human life moved forward without interruption. They did not know, or perhaps they knew, and had decided it was not yet worth worrying about. Humanity had long practiced at carrying enormous things quietly. The decision, when it came, was not born of courage on the Council's part. It was born of something rarer and more painful, honest reckoning. They had looked at what they had nearly done and what it had nearly cost them. They had looked at the frozen fleet and the great structure beyond Pluto, still patient, still watching, its power reading steady and unhurried. They had read the ancient files and understood, at last, what the predecessor empire had failed to understand before it ceased to exist. Strength without restraint is just violence with good timing. Humanity had the strength and had chosen restraint for 200 years, until the moment restraint was no longer an option. And even then, even when pushed to the edge of extinction, they had responded with the minimum necessary force. They had locked the fleet. They had repositioned it. They had spoken in a calm voice. They had offered a final chance. They had not destroyed a single ship. That restraint, the Council began to understand, was not weakness. It was the most terrifying thing they had ever witnessed, because it meant humanity was choosing. At every step, they had chosen not to escalate. The question that settled like ice into every mind in that chamber was simple and devastating. What would it take for them to stop choosing? The Supreme Council arose. He had lived long enough to see empires end and new ones begin. He had cast votes that shaped the galaxy. And now he stood in a chamber haunted by the ghost of a species everyone had underestimated, and spoke with the quiet weight of someone who has just finished revising everything he thought he knew. Remove Earth from the Extermination List. The order moved through the network in seconds. The list updated. Earth's name disappeared. In the outer solar system, the frozen Imperial Fleet felt its systems retain. Gradually, like blood flowing back into a numbed limb. Engines restarted. Life support stabilized. Navigation came back online. Weapons powered up, but targeting systems refused to orient toward Earth, locked into a soft restriction that engineers would spend months trying to remove and never quite succeed. A final transmission came from the human structure. The same calm voice. The same unhurried certainty. But the words were different now, and the silence they fell into was different, too. Not the silence of shock, but of understanding. We prefer peace, but we will never face extinction again. No cheering, no triumph, no threat layered beneath the surface of the words. Just a simple, absolute statement of fact offered to a galaxy that was only now beginning to understand how long it had been true. The massive structure beyond Pluto began its long, slow power down. Panels folded inward across its surface like wings settling after flight. Energy signatures faded back toward silence. In the sensor readings of every ship in the retreating fleet, the object grew dimmer and dimmer until it crossed back into invisibility. Not gone, never gone, simply no longer necessary to be seen. Waiting, as it had always waited. The Imperial Fleet toned and left without firing a single shot. They did not speak of it on the way home. Some things require distance before language becomes possible. In the years that followed, the Extermination List continued to exist. The Galactic Council did not dismantle it. They were too old an institution for that kind of reform, and there were still species in the galaxy that warranted concern. But something had changed in how the list was regarded. It was consulted less. The threshold for addition rose dramatically. The debates grew longer, more careful, more haunted by the memory of a blue planet rotating on a holographic screen. Earth's name never appeared on it again. Humanity continued to be humanity. They kept arguing with each other, kept solving problems a hard way, kept building things and breaking them and building them better. From the outside, they looked exactly as they always had, a divided, emotional, complicated species working through the long, slow labor becoming what it might eventually be. But the galaxy looked at them differently now, not with fear, or not only with fear, with something more nuanced, more respectful, the feeling one gets when realizing that the stranger who has been sitting quietly in the corner of the room, the one everyone ignored because they seemed unremarkable, has been listening to every word spoken and understanding all of it, and has simply chosen, until now, not to speak. Humanity had not been lucky. Humanity had not bluffed. They had built Protocol Eternum centuries ago, hidden it in the cold dark of deep space with the patience of a civilization that understood something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. That survival is not an accident. That peace is not the absence of the capacity for war. It is the presence of the wisdom not to begin one unnecessarily. That the most dangerous thing in the universe is not a species that strikes first. It is a species that waits until the moment is exactly right. And from that day forward, in council chambers and fleet briefing rooms, in the archives of 100 civilizations, in the quiet calculations of empires still weighing their ambitions against the long patience of unknown powers, one truth settled into the understanding of the galaxy like bedrock. Humanity had always been ready. They had simply been waiting for someone to make them prove it. The galaxy had many laws. Civilizations rose and fell, empires expanded and crumbled. Stars were born and swallowed themselves in silence, but through it all, one law stood above the rest. It was not written in any language of peace. It bore no signature of diplomacy. It was simply known, whispered in council chambers and feared across 1,000 worlds, as the Extermination List. Any planet placed on that list did not survive. There were no debates, no peace talks, no second chances, no letters of appeal addressed to indifferent gods. For centuries, the Galactic Council had wielded the list like a surgeon's blade, cold, precise, and final, using it to remove what they called unstable species, those too volatile, too unpredictable, too primitive to be trusted among the stars. Entire civilizations disappeared. Stars burned quietly over worlds that no longer held life. History moved on, as it always does, indifferent to the graves it leaves behind. And now, a new name had appeared. Earth! The blue planet rotated slowly on the giant holographic display at the center of the council chamber, a beautiful, fragile-looking thing, swayed in white clouds and deep oceans, its continents a patchwork of green and brown. The alien leaders of the Galactic Council studied it with cold, analytical eyes. Their faces, in all their varied forms, carried the same expression: mild curiosity, mild contempt, the particular detachment of those accustomed to making historic decisions the way one might swat an insect. The case against Earth had been building for decades. Primitive weapons, divided nations, an emotional species prone to self-destruction, to tribalism, to wasting resources on conflicts that solved nothing. They had not yet achieved sustainable interstellar travel. Their wars were numerous and brutal. By every metric the Council used, humanity was a powder keg, one that would only grow more dangerous as it matured. Better to remove the threat now, while it was still manageable. The vote was swift. Earth was approved for removal. Far from the council chamber, the Imperial Fleet prepared for launch. Massive warships powered their engines in the cold dark of deep space, their hulls gleaming with the quiet menace of a civilization that had done this many times before. Soldiers loaded weapons. Officers reviewed tactical projections. Commanders studied the composition of Earth's primitive defenses. Nuclear arsenals pointed at each other, atmospheric fighters, orbital platforms of embarrassingly limited range, and allowed themselves small, private smiles. To them, it was routine. Another world, another mission, another species that would see the fleet descend upon them and send one final, desperate burst of radio toward a universe that would not answer. They expected fear. They expected surrender. They expected the quiet dignity of a species that understood, in its final hours, that it had never truly stood a chance. But Earth did not send a surrender message. Instead, something else happened. Before the fleet could initiate its hyperspace jump, before a single ship had even oriented toward the target system, every major communication channel across the galaxy flickered. Not with static, not with interference, with purpose. A signal cut through the noise like a blade through silk, old, encrypted in a human cipher so ancient that 3 separate translation suites were needed to decode it, and utterly impossible in its reach. It was everywhere at once. Trade networks, military channels, the private, supposedly impenetrable servers of the Council itself. The signal did not come from Earth's governments. It did not come from any of their satellites or stations. It came from deep space, somewhere far beyond the outer edge of the solar system, in the cold and lightless dark where nothing should have been. The message was short, 12 words, once translated. But when those 12 words appeared on the screens of the council chamber, silence fell like a stone into still water. Some leaders rose suddenly from their seats. Others demanded immediate system scans, convinced it was a trick, a bluff, the desperate theater of a species with no other card to play. Because the message did not beg for mercy. It did not threaten war. It offered no negotiation, no ultimatum, no plea. It said, simply, you have activated Protocol Eternum. Humanity will now respond. Moments later, long-range sensors along the outer edge of Earth's solar system detected something moving, something massive, something that had not been there a moment ago, or rather, something that had been there all along, invisible, silent, patient, and was only now choosing to be seen. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy realized that the list might have made a mistake. The Council moved fast. Engineers raced to purge the signal from their systems. Firewalls slammed into place, and the most advanced security protocols in galactic history were thrown at the transmission like a wall against the tide. The signal did not disappear. It repeated, calm, patient, relentless, on every channel they tried to lock down. Military frequencies, diplomatic networks, the private encrypted lines the Council used only in times of the direst emergency. Every screen showed the same 12 words. You have activated Protocol Eternum. Humanity will now respond. Panic does not wear the same face on every species. Some tremble. Some go rigid. Some retreat into cold calculation as a defense against a terrifying realization that they do not understand what is happening. The alien leaders of the Council showed all of these in their various forms and tried very hard not to let each other see. The Supreme Archivist was the first to find his voice. Search all recorded conflict involving humans. He ordered every skirmish, every border dispute, every engagement on record. Open the sealed vaults if you have to. I want everything.